Welcome back. I'm painting this boring ATM machine today. It sits on the sidewalk outside a bodega near my studio. I'll be watching the replay along with you, and I'll be challenging myself to find beauty even in this beat up machine. If you're new, I'm Francis Shui. I'm a working artist based here in New York City. Like, share, subscribe to hear more about my watercolor techniques. I love to share about my process and pass along a tip or two. In this painting, you're going to see four main techniques. You're going to see how I use liquid mask to create a shiny reflective surface, how I use a wash to lend atmosphere and set the subject in its environment. You're going to see how I use different sized brushes for different purposes, and then you're going to see how I can actually create letters by lifting. Liquid mask is great for conveying shiny reflective surfaces in your painting. Before I paint, I usually look at the reference photo and try to determine what are the shiniest, brightest parts of that image that I want to retain using the white of the paper. In this image, it was actually an overcast day, so the range of values is not that great. The main highlights that I wanted to show are the two diagonal lines on the screen and then the top edge of the round knob towards the bottom of the machine, which is some sort of security mechanism. After applying the mask, you have to wait about 30 minutes for it to dry, and then after that you can actually lay watercolor paint on top of that. You can see here that painting over the dried liquid mask will leave this area that is resisted by the liquid mask, and later on when we peel off the mask, it will actually leave the white of the paper showing. Like the other paintings in this series of machines that I painted, I lay down a green wash over the entire surface. Having this underlayer of green will actually help harmonize the image because subsequent layers of color on top of the green will actually still show some of the green underneath, and this will help add some cohesion to the entire image. It will keep the different parts of the subject from feeling separate. It will feel like an actual mass that we find in our environment where light is reflecting all over, and we can get a sense of the material that this machine is made of. And while I finish the wash here, if you're thinking that painting an ATM machine is kind of boring, I get it, that's okay. I walk past this machine every day. I never gave it a second thought. And then one day I noticed it, and then it made me stop, and I took a bunch of pictures. It made me think maybe there's something compelling about this image. And I think that's the point. I stopped, something caught my attention. It made me want to pay attention to it and honor it somehow. After all, it's something that was designed by people to make things easier for us. After the wash is dry, I'm adding more layers of perylene green on top of this. I'm adding more green to areas that need to be darker because in watercolor, when you add the same color onto itself, you're actually making it darker because you're just covering up the paper another layer. So you can see I've done most of the larger sections that require some darker green, and now I'm adding some Payne's gray at the top of the machine to bring out the screen, which has a dark frame underneath it. You can see that the liquid mask is resisting the color that I'm putting on it, so we'll have a good idea of what those reflections will look like when we remove them later. So you'll notice that I'm using different sized brushes here throughout the painting. The larger the area you need to cover, the larger the brush you need. A larger brush holds more water and more pigment. So if you use a small brush, you have to constantly go back to your palette and back to the water to reload your brush. And every time you do that, you risk interrupting the flow of the water and the color that's on the paper already. So it's better to think about what kind of brush size is adequate for a particular spot that you're trying to paint. Again, a larger brush will cover more area in less time. And a smaller brush is great for finer details, smaller lines. I use a big flat brush, bigger than this sometimes, to cover a wider area on the paper. It physically covers more paper evenly, so you can get a nice even stroke all the way across, and you can do this row by row. You can also use a large round brush and play around with the angle of the brush when you're painting. You can go from wide to finer just by changing the angle of your brush. And a small round brush like this, which is a number 2, helps with fine lines, details, and I do this towards the end of a painting. You can see that I'm going back and forth from one section to another. It's important to do this because sometimes you need to let a section dry before you keep working on it. So while you let it dry, you move to another area and work on that. If you don't do this and you brush a certain area too much, you're liable to pick up too much pigment, and you may lift off too much color, or you may leave unwanted marks. So I'm applying paint in one spot and I'm going to another and working on that spot. And as you do this, you get a feel for which values are appearing darker, or maybe they're too light, and one area might get darker and that might make another area feel too light. So you need to go back and work in that area and make it darker. So in this way, it helps to keep scanning the entire composition to see how the values are relating to each other. The only other color I decided to use here really is the lemon yellow, which is a cooler yellow. And I'm using that to color in the sticky paper or label that's at the bottom of the machine. Otherwise, I'm using the same color and various shades of the same color, mostly the green and some grays, to really bring out the contours of the machine. And I'm using some Payne's gray and more saturated versions of the Payne's gray to get at the details and the shadows. This will help provide definition to the contours of the machine and make certain areas pop. By the way, in the science fiction film genre, there's this whole approach to the depiction of machines. I've heard it called the used future, where an advanced society actually has advanced technology, but that technology looks worn and outdated and used. The worn and torn look of these beat-up machines instantly feel like they have character and depth to them. We see this aesthetic in films like Blade Runner, Star Wars, Aliens, and it's really expected now in the sci-fi genre. And walking around the city today, it's an unmistakable aesthetic. It's true to life. We immediately sense a history and a character to something when it's worn and old and dirty. At one point, this ATM machine or the photocopier at Staples or a vending machine at a gas station, they were all bright and shiny when they first came off the assembly line. But now they're worn and dirty, and when we see these things like that, we automatically sense a character and some history behind it. So capturing this look on this ATM machine is a cool way to add some depth and character to something that we wouldn't otherwise pay that much attention to. So here I'm accentuating some of the features by putting down some of the dark lines, and I'm using this smaller brush to get at some of the recesses and the areas that have to be in shadow. So I'm taking the fine brush and marking lines where the edges are, and this helps to define the machine even further. And it's, like I've said before, it's really nice to be at this point where I'm actually putting in some shadows and dark areas. This helps to really make things pop and stand out, and it makes things really feel three-dimensional. I'm adding the lines here that show the slot where you stick your card in, and also the cash dispenser, the horizontal line in the middle. And here I'm adding the dark line at the top, which highlights the edge of the round part over the screen. And now I'm just using some, again, it's still Payne's gray, and I'm using it to outline the shape and some of the seams that are on this machine, because it's not all just one piece. It's actually metal that's put together. And so as these dark lines help fill in some of the shapes, I'm also using the Payne's gray to show the shadowy areas. And here there's the keypad where it's like within a little round recessed area. I'm using some lemon yellow to show that brighter area. It actually is that color. I think when it's turned on, it is supposed to glow a bit. And you can see that the fine lines here really help to bring out the shapes on the machine. And again, because I have the green wash down, the wash actually makes the machine fit into its environment better. It harmonizes the picture as a whole. We know that the surface of the machine in real life is actually a grayish color, but we still get the effect here because the values, the overall values, the relationship between the lights and the darks throughout the image are relatively correct, and our mind tells us that the machine is gray, but actually the gray that's in the painting, it's not a gray, it's a green. So this is a good place to talk about the relationship between color and value. There's a saying that value does all the work, but color gets all the credit. You know, when you look at something and you say, oh, I love that painting, and if pressed further, you might say, oh, it's because of the colors. But actually, it's really the relationship of the values that really come across to make a painting look the way it does to you. More often than not, we're actually responding to the relationship between the lights and the darks in the painting rather than just the colors on their own. So you can have an absence of lots of color, but if the values between the different tones and the colors on the image, let's say you only have a few colors, if the values are correct, meaning the dark areas are appropriately dark and the light areas are appropriately light, then it will look true and real to you. That's almost as pleasing to us as a nice color, so to speak. So this saying is pretty valuable. It's good to keep in mind because you actually don't need a lot of color to create a beautiful image. You can just use one color and maybe have different shades of it, and you could still get across a very beautiful, compelling image. In another video, I showed how I use gouache paint to write letters on the subject. Here the letters are faded. If I use gouache paint, the contrast would be too stark. The method I ended up using was to use Payne's gray to actually cover the entire area where the letters would be. Lifting out the pigment eventually reveals the letters themselves. And this actually feels a little bit closer to reality. The look of the letters on the screen, they're printed on the surface underneath the screen, so it's not very stark. This actually feels a little bit closer to life. And now I've already removed the liquid mask. You can see the white of the paper. It really looks like shining reflections now. And I'm polishing up the edges around the masked area. Sometimes it's helpful to actually put down more mask to cover more area than you actually need, so that later on, after you remove the mask, you can freely go in and actually finesse the edges leading up to that masked area. So in this video, we saw examples of using liquid mask to create a shiny reflective surface, using a wash to set the stage and set an atmosphere for the subject matter, and using different size brushes for different purposes. And then finally, we saw how we can actually create letters by just lifting pigment. Even if you're a beginner, I encourage you to try one of these techniques. You can really level up your skills if you try one of these approaches in your next painting. If you enjoyed this, like, share, subscribe to see more of my watercolor techniques, or visit my website at art-francis.com to see more of my original artworks and how you may commission me for a custom artwork. Also, if there's anything you want to see more of on my channel, comment below and I'll be happy to oblige. Until the next time, go and paint.